So good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm quite pleased to welcome such famous experts around the world. So I will start by Professor Ravindran from New Zealand, from Massey University, Dr. Ferry Ponarma from Indonesia, from Java, and Professor Mike Kidd from University of Arkansas in the States. And I think I tried to organize a debate this afternoon about quite a challenging topic, formulating diets under hot conditions, and with a challenge between low protein diets and high amino acid intake, because we need to make the animal grow. Anyone want to start to comment on that before going further on the debate?
Well, I think we have a lot to learn. We've been researching this concept for, I guess, as long as we've been researching in general with poultry science. With regard to the specific amino acids in question, we have a difference in the growth rate of the birds. So we have loss of muscle, we have loss of body weight, and we have more turnover. So it's something that we need to pinpoint on how we can better focus to meet critical amino acids. The intestine has received some recent attention, some work in Southeast Asia, but it goes back to the need for amino acids for first pass protein deposition of mucin, for intestinal synthesis, and during heat stress you have more issues in the intestine. So that area is something that's going to need to be reevaluated and potentially ramped up. But at the same time, how do we maintain that growth, for example, with the birds during the heat stress conditions? So there's tomorrow we'll go through a lot of information, and that's kind of, I think, what everybody's going to do is review the literature and give some key updates on things.
Thanks, Mike. I say often it's a challenge, but in fact, growing birds is already a challenge. Maybe, Professor Ravindran, you have a comment on that regarding on the digestibility, the gut physiology, and the amino acid demand.
Very few reports actually talk about relative humidity in the trial. And also, when you talk about high temperature itself, there are acute, there could be differences between acute heat stress and continuous heat stress, as well as cyclic heat stress, and so these are issues which are not really addressed. But like Mike mentioned, certainly we know that intestine is affected during heat stress. The integrity of the intestine, there is inflammation, there is more endogenous losses. A lot of things happen in the intestine, which certainly should have an effect on feed digestibility. But unfortunately, if you look at the literature, there are very limited work done on feed digestibility under hot conditions. That is what I mean is, comparing the thermoneutral conditions and hot conditions in the same trial. There are very few reports. There are only very few reports.
You think we should revise our digestibility values depending on the environment?
That's a very good question, $1 million question. But there's an effect on digestibility, okay? Even though it's not conclusively proven by experimental data, there is certainly an effect on digestibility because of the effect it has on intestine. And whether it should be revised, that's a big question to ask. What I feel is we should not do that. That is my opinion, because it doubles the work, and also it needs to be done in hot environments, again, which lack the research facilities, at least from my point of view. And also it needs quite a bit of capital investment to do research such as this. So to repeat in the trials, what I see is when you look at the numbers, digestible numbers, for example, protein digestible numbers for corn soy diets in temperate countries and tropical countries, I see very little difference, almost we get the more or less similar value within the range. And but I don't know what happens when you include byproducts into this, whether there's going to be a big difference, which will make a big difference. That's what I suspect.
Yeah, because clearly you mentioned that the hot condition affects the intestine, the metabolism of the physiology. But on the practical term, Dr. Ferry, should we change the value, or should we use the same values, worldwide values? And as Dr. Ravindran say, in fact, if we use byproducts, it may be an issue. On the practical day, what is your position on that?
Oh, well, practically I'm using the same value like what you guys use for the thermoneutral zones bird. But that's again, we have to be very careful because this is a heat stress chicken. So I try to keep the excess of non-essential amino acid as low as possible by playing more with synthetic amino acid. That's number one. Number two, as Dr. Ravindran said, that when you have a heat stress, somehow you change the profile of the microbacteria profile in the hen gut. So make sure I don't feed the bug in the hen gut. Otherwise, I will create dysbacteriosis. And second thing, I'm trying to make sure that this is the issue that probably Dr. Kit and Dr. Ravindran will put. To me, when I decide independently between the percentage amino acid and energy level, but sometimes for tropical country we have to be very careful. So sometimes I have to recalculate it back to express my percents of amino acids per 1,000 kilocalorie.
To be sure that, in fact, you bring enough with the lower consumption of energy and...
Exactly. For example, in one of our trial where we do a factorial 3x3 in the closed house, 3x3, 3 level of lysine, 3 level of energy in the closed house and in the open house. This is two different time. We do see a problem that we do see that the chicken will eat to satisfy the calorie first. So when you put your energy is higher, the protein, the feed intake is dropped, so your energy, your amino acid intake is also dropped. So you have to link these two things together. You cannot decide it independently.
Yeah. And addressing the question of lowering the protein content of the diet, it's a common concern everywhere in the world, trying to reduce the nitrogen losses and so on. How should we manage that under hot conditions when you think, in fact, they are already eating less and they need more amino acids, in fact, to grow?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's a function of just dropping protein. I think balance would be really key, and balance per therm, going back to when Owen Thomas established all the amino acid requirements as a ratio to energy, and that will allow for some flexibility in lowering protein. So when we say lowering protein, we're minimizing excesses. So it results in less oil seeds, providing excesses, so that catabolism or lack of frees up some calories for the bird.
Maybe Professor Ravindran, you want to add a comment on that?
Just to add to what Mike mentioned, what I think is, certainly the diets have to be formulated on the basis of digestible amino acids, and use of synthetic amino acids all will help under hot environment. But the question I have is, even under thermoneutral conditions, we are not really 100% sure how to manage the we know that we can reduce the protein a little bit by using the key limiting amino acids plus few more. But again, it's a cost factor. Whether adding additional amino acids, whether it's balances against the cutting down the protein. So it's a question of economics. But the point I'm trying to make is, can we translate what we find in the thermoneutral conditions into hot conditions?
Absolutely, and there seems to be, as you mentioned, more intestinal insults with the hot temperature conditions. So when you think about the amino acids in question, glycine, glutamine, amino acids that we always don't put at the top of our list, potentially are going to need to be really considered, because the critical point is the first pass protein for absorption. So.
Okay, I just probably this is Dr. Kate will see it. If the heat stress chicken we experience increasing the oxidative heat stress, so that means you need more glutathione. So does it mean that I have to put more my total sulfur amino acid in the diet? And number two, the literature said that the transport of the amino acid in the heat stress chicken is somehow reduced because the down regulation of the amino acid transporter. Is that because of the competition for the same transporter, or simply the transporter is just the number is reduced?
Who wants to comment on that? Because it's clearly a good question, in fact. We always are challenged about that. I remember the lysine arginine and so on, and you have always challenge under hot conditions. There is a compromise at the gut level, and we need to deal with that when we formulate. And obviously, there is more demand for some specific amino acids. So in practice, Dr. Ferry, when you formulate, do you think that under the very hot conditions you can face and so on, you need to change the amino acid profile of the diet compared to what we know in the rest of the world? Or?
Some people said that adding something is improving, but the question is, what heat stress we are talking about here? Which one?
Yeah, I can't emphasize that point enough that Ravi made earlier. The problem is the research. Some investigations don't look into a real stress model. There's a temperature effect, and that's it. But you can't call it stress. And you have the point where some researchers have independent rooms where you lose your experimental power, because in reality you need to have multiple rooms in one facility with different temperatures to do it properly. So there's a lot of confounding issues with this type of work.
So it's just the temperature, 21 degrees versus 32 degrees. But where in the natural condition, there are a lot of other things going on. There's relative humidity, there's different types of heat stress, and then you have acclimation. That is, the birds also get used to, just like us. For example, in Bangkok, most people who are living here don't feel the heat, whereas we get stressed, at least during the first week or so. And so acclimatization is certainly a real issue in field conditions. Then you have severity, and duration, and timing, all these things. Because heat stress is something becomes relevant only after 3 weeks. Before that, I don't know, Dr. Ferry can tell us, I believe there's no heat stress. At least, the chicken are not as badly affected as they are after 3 weeks. So there are a number of factors which, in an experiment model, it's impossible to cover.
This is a good point. Tomorrow I will show one graph where one day I could kill the chicken at 3.5% of the population because of just I call it heat spike. So if the previous day is lower compared to the today, for example, if you have 2 degrees or 3 degrees, then you start seeing a sudden death syndrome. Very easy. That it's only occur when the bird is at 1.5 kg or heavier.
Okay. So body weight.
Body weight.
Again, when we talk about hot conditions, we should really revise what we say and precise what we say. Regarding the amino acids and the protein, I think it's a very important issue today to consider, in fact, the amino acid balance regarding also the stress situation. I would not say maybe hot condition only, but what you mentioned is to say it's stressful conditions. Meaning stress means stress at the gut level, maybe some loss of amino acids and so on, and maybe it's more a general topic than just under hot conditions, I would say. Maybe you see what I mean, Mike. The loss of amino acid might be important. Whatever the condition, it's a stress conditions that create a more demand on the amino acids.
Yeah, clearly, stress in general, if we look at physiological stress, the first aspect in terms of the poultry whole body synthesis is more fat and less protein. So there's a lot of things that are taking place with amino acid supply in all stress environments that are going to change supply quite a bit. So absolutely.
What I believe is, despite there is no conclusive evidence, I believe there's a effect on digestibility because of the fact, there's intestines are very badly affected. But what I think, the effect on post-absorptive metabolism is much, much greater than what you see on the intestinal level.
On the first level of digestibility, do you think enzyme, for instance, can help to I would say solve a little bit or help the animals to better digest because if they are challenged?
Certainly, enzymes have multiple effects, and we know that they can improve the morphology. So, in other words, they can actually partly overcome the negative effects of heat stress, not 100%. So, I think what we should be considering enzyme as a part of the package. It's not going to answer everything. But anyway, the point I was making was, so certainly digestion is affected, but also
but metabolic.
Once it's absorbed, there is synthesis, degradation, all these things are affected much more than the digestion.
Okay,
Any comment? Yeah.
Our internal data indicating that the heat stress layers. I'm talking about layers now because I have the data of the layers. Somehow they retain amino acid and energy per gram egg weight is higher. I calculated down what is the feed intake, what is the amino acid intake, what is the calorie intake, and then I divided by the egg weight. So somehow, when the bird kept in the open house, they retain more calorie, they retain more amino acid per gram egg weight.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Is that maybe linked to the feed intake per se, or the? What do you think, Mike?
No idea on that one, but we'll look at data tomorrow.
Yes, and then the last publication, I think it was last year, showing the same thing for broiler. Somehow, when they keep the broiler in the heat stress, the retained amino acid per gram weight gain is higher, especially very high for cysteine.
Quite interesting. It links to the need for maybe glutathione, as you said before, and so on. It's maybe linked to the oxidative metabolism and defense against.
That's what I've been thinking that way. You need the glutathione, and then your cysteine is the precursor of glutathione. Probably you need more on that, or something like that. But that's still, to me, the data is not really, convinced, to the point that, it's again because of the models of the heat stress they are using. So make everything is difficult to interpret the data.
So I think quite a lot of areas still to dig on and to for future research, I would say, because it's not so clear. And we haven't talked about phosphorus, for instance, because under hot conditions, maybe the metabolism is also driven by the ATP, by the phosphorus need, and so on. Maybe Professor Ravindran, you have a comment on that?
No, not the comment, but certainly minerals also. We are not talking about minerals, but minerals are also affected in a hot environment. Especially output in the urine. One thing which happens is the urine output is increased, and also it becomes more concentrated. The concentration of calcium, phosphorus, some of these electrolytes are concentrated in the urine. So the birds will go into some sort of negative balance. Not exactly negative balance, but the mineral retention is very adversely affected in hot temperatures.
So we need to really revise our nutrition background under these challenging conditions. So I appreciate your efforts and our discussion this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward for our meeting tomorrow and to see, I'm sure, very exciting presentation and a lot of questions raising. Thank you very much.